Neo-Tigo Games!
Hey there folks, and welcome to Story Stripdown, the show where we strip down the stories from movies, video games, and books to see what worked and what didn't work. I'm Drew from Neo-Tigo Games, and since I'm currently writing a few of my own stories, my plan is to dig into the classics and my personal favorites to learn from them and improve my own storytelling skills. If you're interested in narrative structures and character development, keep on listening and join me on my learning journey. So at the moment, I'm working on a sequel to my game Gloom and Doom. I thought it'd be a great idea to look at two very different sequels into different franchises to see exactly how sequels can be constructed to extend an existing story. The two movies I'll be talking about today are Blade 2 and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. As usual, Story Stripdown is full of spoilerific content, so you might want to watch those movies first if you haven't already done so.
Forget what you think you know. Vampires exist. My name is Blade. I was born half human, half vampire. They call me the Daywalker.
First up is Blade 2, the 2002 follow-up to what can be considered the first proper Marvel movie. Blade 2 was written by David S. Goyer, directed by Guillermo del Toro, and stars Wesley Snipes, Chris Christopherson, and frequent Del Toro collaborator Ron Perlman. In Blade 1, Blade is a half-human, half-vampire known as the Daywalker, and he hunts vampires. In modern day, vampires have become something like an underworld mafia, hiding in the shadows while manipulating governments to sustain their vampiric activities. With the help of his mentor Whistler, a father figure who also makes shiny weapons, Blade goes up against an upstart vampire named Deacon Frost, who is trying to resurrect a blood god to enslave all of humanity. They fight, Blade wins, and at the end of the movie, he keeps on hunting vampires, but now in a different country. In the sequel, Blade is still hunting vampires, but now without the aid of Whistler, who was turned into a vampire at the end of the previous movie. The first act of Blade 2 involves Blade rescuing his mentor and turning him back into a human. And then we're introduced to the Reapers, led by a super vampire named Jarek Nomak. If vampirism is a virus, then Reapers are a mutated strain of that virus, and they're even scarier and more resilient than regular vampires. And now they feed on both humans and vampires. Reapers are so scary that the vampire royal family has reached out to Blade to seek a truce in order to fight these Reapers together. Blade reluctantly joins forces with the vampires, including the vampire princess Nisa, and becomes the leader of an elite vampire kill squad called the Blood Pack, who were originally formed to kill him. Lots of badass fighting transpires, new powerful weapons are made, and eventually the vampires double-cross Blade. So he defeats them and the Reapers.
You have been our most feared enemy. But now there's something else loose on the streets. Something worse than you.
So how does Blade 2 keep Blade's story going? It takes the successful elements in Blade 1 and pumps up the volume on them. It's all about expansion and escalation. The story structure is largely the same, in that it's Blade's continuing adventures against the vampires, but with the stakes ramped up higher. Get it? Stakes? Okay, I actually didn't mean to make that pun, but oh well, I'm gonna pretend it was totally intentional. The first movie pitted Blade against a ton of generic vampire gangsters who can barely slow him down, even when attacking in large groups. So how do you improve on that? You upgrade them into an elite kill squad where everyone has a unique look and a name. I mean, they even recruited Hong Kong superstar Donnie Yen in their roster, in one of his early Hollywood roles. The vampires in the Blood Pack have become deadlier, and they get way more screen time so they can demonstrate just exactly how badass they are. Blade's array of weapons were already super cool in the first movie, with his glaives, that modified MAC-10 submachine pistol shooting silver bullets, and that sleek ninja sword I so desperately want hanging on my living room wall. Well, his weapons have been expanded in the sequel to include new gadgets, like UV sunlight grenades. Now these don't make any sense at all, but damn do they look amazing in action when they create an overexposed backlit silhouette sword fighting sequence. You gotta go check that out. Finally, we've got the big bad himself. Deacon Frost in the first movie didn't exactly pose much of a physical threat to Blade, at least not until it became the Blood God at the end. So David S. Goyer expanded on the big bad in the sequel with Jarrett Nomak, a super vampire reaper that is more than a match for Blade from the very beginning. While Frost only threatened humankind in the first movie, the second movie escalated this so that Nomak is a threat to both humans and vampires. Everyone is scared of Nomak. So now the bad guys are badder, the weapons are more powerful, and the stakes are higher. There is also one more element that was expanded in the sequel, and that is the theme of family and parents. In the first movie, Blade's mother was the victim of a vampire attack and supposedly died giving birth to Blade, making him an orphan. Whistler then becomes a father figure to him and aids him on his quest to avenge his mother by finding and killing the vampire that attacked her. Spoiler alert, it was Deacon Frost. And then his mother actually became one of Frost's vampire mistresses. That showdown in the end between Blade and his mom was supposed to be some kind of tense moment, but honestly it didn't quite work for me. I mean, how much love could Blade have for someone he had only met for a few minutes as an infant, as a newborn infant at that? Other than giving birth to him, she did no other mothering and had absolutely zero involvement in his life. So really, who is she to him? Anyway, this theme of biological versus found families is expanded in Blade 2. Blade rescues Whistler and turns him back from being a vampire, but there is some distrust there because, well, there's a traitor in their midst, and it could very well be the father figure who spent years as a vampire. This untrustworthy father theme is mirrored in the vampire royal family, where the vampire overlord Damaskinos is shown to be a cold-hearted deadbeat who is totally willing to sacrifice the life of his daughter in order to kill Nomak. And then a further plot twist kicks in when Nomak turns out to be his son, and it was Damaskinos himself who infected his own son with the Reaper virus in an effort to genetically engineer super vampires. Damaskinos, biological father to Princess Nyssa and Nomak, was the worst father ever. Meanwhile, Whistler, adopted father figure to Blade, turns out to be a gruff but loving parent who would never betray Blade. Birth parents who turn against you seem to be a recurring theme in David S. Goyer's Blade scripts. Indeed, in his script for the third movie, Goyer made it so that Dracula, father of all vampires, decides that all vampires are inferior to him and need to be exterminated. Well, that's one way to avoid taking responsibility for your descendants. This parenting theme didn't need to be expanded upon in Blade 2, but I'm personally glad it was there. It adds a different dimension to the story, though it's obviously overshadowed by the action and horror elements. What's the benefit of using expansion and escalation as the building blocks for a sequel? Well, it helps you manage audience expectations. It's familiar ground, so they're already in for the ride, and with things pushed a bit higher, it's not too repetitive from the first movie. More of the same, but with a higher dosage. Other examples of similar sequels would be Die Hard 2, 22 Jump Street, and Home Alone 2. I especially love that the character of John McClane in Die Hard 2 overtly acknowledges this repeat in the formula.
Another basement, another elevator. How could the same shit happen to the same guy twice?
This works for a lot of stories, especially genre ones like Die Hard. It would certainly be weird if everyone enjoyed Home Alone 1 with all the wacky scenes of Kevin outsmarting the wet bandits with his homemade booby traps, and then when they sit down for Home Alone 2, suddenly the story drastically changes tone, and now it's about Kevin's relationship with a classmate who can't handle her widowed dad starting to date again. However, a change in tone for a sequel could sometimes be the right thing to do, as we'll see in the next movie we're going to examine.
Apes! Do not want war, but will fight if we must.
So the next sequel I'm going to look at is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, sequel to Rise of the Planet of the Apes. If that confuses you, yes, I feel the same way. Couldn't the producers just put numbers in their film titles? Like Planet of the Apes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I always end up having to consult the internet to remember which order they come in. In case you're interested, it's Rise, Dawn, War, and then Kingdom. I guarantee I will forget the first two by the end of this podcast. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is a 2014 science fiction movie written by Mark Bombach, Rick Jaffer, and Amanda Silver. It's directed by Matt Reeves and stars Andy Serkis, Jason Clarke, Gary Oldman, and Kerry Russell. In the first movie, Caesar is a little baby ape with genetically enhanced intelligence, and he's being raised by a chemist named Will and Will's father Charles. At first, Caesar lives happily with his found family of humans, but as he grows older, he starts to realize his differences from Will and Charles. There's a great scene in the movie where Caesar asks Will if he's a pet, but Will insists that Caesar is more like a son to him. A misunderstanding causes Caesar to be taken away by the government and put into an ape habitat, where he finally interacts with other apes for the first time. In this habitat, the apes are mistreated by Draco Malfoy, so Caesar turns them all into super intelligent apes and breaks them out to find freedom. Caesar's ape army is forced to fight past a police blockade, and then they take refuge in a redwood forest just outside San Francisco. In the meantime, a virus breaks out that threatens humanity. Now the second movie takes place 10 years later. Caesar's community in the redwood forest has prospered, and he has started a family of his own. Outside the forest, the virus at the end of the first movie has killed most of the humans on Earth, and society has collapsed. The known survivors have gathered in a small community in San Francisco, but without much electricity and other resources, they are isolated from the rest of the world. The humans send a small team to reclaim a hydroelectric dam within Caesar's territory, but there is suspicion and blind hatred on both sides. Caesar and a progressive-thinking human named Malcolm bond, and they try to work together as they both want to avoid war and conflict. But an aggressive ape named Kober bears too much of a grudge against humans, and Kober works to break this truce. Later on, Kober decides that Caesar is too soft with the humans, so he tries to assassinate Caesar and leads a coup to take control of the apes. Now in control, Kober launches a full-scale attack on the humans in San Francisco. Any apes that challenge his authority are either enslaved or killed. After recovering from Kober's assassination attempt, Caesar defeats Kober and takes back leadership of the apes. However, Kober's actions have destroyed any chance of peace with the humans.
Humans, attack your sons. You let them stay. Put apes in danger. Caesar loves humans more than apes. More than your sons.
While Blade 2 was an expansion and escalation of Blade 1, Dawn is more of an evolution of Caesar's story. It's a very different movie from the first one, in tone and themes. The only returning elements are the ape characters of Caesar, Maurice, Rocket, and Kober, and the virus that killed off most of humanity, including every human character in the first movie. The world now is completely different, as this is a post-apocalyptic landscape where humanity has lost their dominance over the planet. Whereas the first movie is about Caesar finding his own family and home, this movie is about Caesar rising into his role as leader of the apes to protect his family and community. There are scenes where Caesar loses the respect of his son Bright Eyes because Kober has poisoned his kid's mind to perceive Caesar's reluctance to declare war as a display of weakness and cowardice. This was never a theme in the first movie, but in the sequel, it's front and center. How do you keep the respect and love of your community while still making the tough and unpopular choices that you believe would ultimately serve them better? The first movie was clearly about apes versus humans, and if the sequel kept the same dynamic, we would never have gotten a powerful and well-written antagonist like Cobra. Yes, he's misguided and bitter, but you can somewhat empathize with him because he spent so much of his life tortured by humans who have no love or respect for other species. And these types of humans are still around, as represented by Dreyfus and Carver. If you made a human like Dreyfus or Carver the main antagonist in this movie, it wouldn't be as strong a story, nor would it serve Caesar's character growth as well. I mean, he's already successfully faced off against external threats. Now he has to learn to manage internal ones. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is clearly another chapter in Caesar's progressing life story. It would make no sense to repeat the same structure in the first movie, because that chapter in Caesar's life has clearly ended with the story neatly wrapped up. It takes the same characters and puts them in a different, but also logically evolved story. Earlier, I made a joke about Macaulay Culkin's other movie, My Girl, being the plot of Home Alone 2, but in that scenario, it was not a logical evolution. You don't tell a story about a boy protecting his home from burglars and then shift him into a supporting character in a story about a girl dealing with her father starting to date again. That just doesn't make sense. But to go from an ape finding his identity and family to a story about that same ape learning to protect his family, now that is a logical progression. You can also look at the Toy Story series of movies as another good example of this. Toy Story 1 is about two toys struggling with identity crises. Woody has to accept that he's not always going to be Andy's favorite toy, and Buzz has to accept that he's not a real space ranger. Toy Story 2 is about the choice between a safe but sterile environment like a museum, and a warm but potentially temporary environment like a kid's bedroom. Toy Story 3 is about letting go and moving on in life. Andy's outgrown his toys, and he's never going to be a kid again. In all these movies, they are the same characters, but completely different stories, and all logical evolutions in the life of a toy. Okay, let's sum up what I've learned from Blade 2 and Rise. Wait. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. 1. If your first story is a genre story with a consistent structure like an action thriller, buddy cop comedy, or Jennifer Lopez's love life, then it's a good idea to retain a similar structure in a sequel, but with certain elements expanded and escalated because the audience is hoping to see more of the same. 2. If your first story is a standalone that was nicely concluded, then the sequel can be tackled with evolutions and explorations into different aspects of the original characters and situations. This way, you can tell a different story that doesn't cheapen the original, but still packed with familiar elements so it's a natural continuation to a series. Thank you for listening to the show. If you enjoy the way I dig into stories, please follow for more story strip-downs. I'd love to see your thoughts on Blade 2 or Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, so please drop a comment with your critique of its story and characters. In next week's episode, I plan to look at the Ghibli classic Kiki's Delivery Service. This episode of Story Stripped Down is written, produced, and hosted by me, Drew Pan. If you'd like to connect with me, you can find me on X as NeoTeagle Games. That's NeoTeagleGames. You can also find my game Gloom and Doom on Steam and all major consoles. It's a horror comedy visual novel about an ancient wraith and a teenage antichrist trying to prevent the apocalypse. If horror fantasy is not your thing, try my comedy novel, Toxic Boss Fight, available on Amazon.com. This one's about office politics and the quest to find meaning at work. Take care, everyone. Keep on reading and writing.